Welcome to the virtual Lubar Center at Marquette Law School, where we are going to be discussing a new round of the Marquette Law School Poll focused on the United States Supreme Court and issues before the court. I'm Alan Borsek. I'm a senior fellow here at the law school. I should note that I am not Mike Goucher. For 15 years, he was the distinguished, that was his title, but that was the reality also, the distinguished leader of our efforts and public programs. And he does not like to use the word retirement. We're referring to it as sort of like an emeritus status at this point. He's continuing to do some projects here, but has stepped away from some of his duties, and I am going to attempt to fill these large shoes. More important, joining us is Professor Charles Franklin, the director of the Marquette Law School Poll. And let's bring Charles in here and start with the mechanics of this new round of polling and a little bit of the overview of what we're doing with the Supreme Court and the Marquette Law School Poll.
Yeah, good morning, Alan. Good to have you. We will start our new chapter here today. So the Marquette Law School Poll, of course, has been polling on Wisconsin issues since 2012. But beginning in 2019, we started doing national surveys focused primarily on the work of the U.S. Supreme Court and the issues before it. The court obviously has become a centerpiece of American politics in recent years, in addition to its always important role in judicial matters and legal matters. So we started polling in 2019. As I said, we did one poll, a national poll then, another in 2020. But this year we've shifted to polling about the court every 2 months so that we can watch opinions of the court shift or not shift over the course of the year as the court accepts cases, hears them, hands down decisions. So we're sort of at the more or less the midway point of our first year of polling every 6 months. And we'll talk about all the issues that we asked about and what the public thinks. We were in the field collecting these data from January 10th to the 21st of 2022. Our sample is 1,000 adults selected from around the country randomly, and it has a margin of error of plus or minus 4 percentage points.
Not surprisingly, let's start with the issue of abortion. We just passed the 49th anniversary of the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision, which established a right to abortion nationwide. It is on the front burner at the court and in the public views. What did we find out about opinion on Roe in this round?
As we've seen in polling about this issue all year, a substantial majority are opposed to overturning Roe, and a modest minority favor overturning Roe. Of the people in our survey who have an opinion about the issue, 72% are opposed to overturning Roe, 28% are in favor. As it happens, those are the same numbers as we saw in July of this year. And it was 30% in favor of overturning, 70% opposed to overturning it when we asked about it in November. So there's really not been very much movement in opinion about this. By the way, I think I said July. I meant to say September was the earlier measure at 2872. And so we're really not seeing much movement there.
However, there's an interesting perspective here on support for limiting the right to abortions, particularly the case that is before the court now from Mississippi. What did we see there?
Yeah, that case is known as the Dobbs Case, and the Mississippi law would sharply limit abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. That would be considerably shorter than what is the current standard under prevailing precedents. There, what we see is an even split. 49% favor the court upholding that law, allowing that ban to take place. 51% opposed, again, among the people who have an opinion about this issue. It has been closely divided since we first asked in September about it. It shifted just a little bit in September. 54 were in favor of upholding the law, 46 would strike it down. Now it's 49-51. I think a close division on that is the right characterization no matter what. But also notice that difference between it and the 72% opposed to striking down Roe. And so we see people more willing to accept a significant increase in the limitations on abortion, even as nearly 3/4 say they don't want Roe stricken down completely.
We also asked about the Texas law, which has not yet come squarely before the court, and it would be more restrictive, generally about 6 weeks limit on abortion, which is very early in a pregnancy. What do we see there?
Well, here, 72% are opposed to that law, 28% in favor of it. Again, in all of these, that's of the percentage of people who have an opinion. By the way, around 70% or 80% have opinions on these issues, but not everybody does. So the views of the Texas law look more like the opposition to striking down Roe, while the views of the Dobbs case seem to be in between those and a much more even split.
What does this say overall about public opinion on abortion?
Well, one of the things we've seen in national polling really since the 1970s, since Roe v. Wade was first decided, is that there are very large majorities that think there should be a right to abortions under some circumstances. Life and health of the mother, rape or incest, but then support falls off and becomes more of an even split as we talk about abortions, which voters are more willing to accept restrictions on. You're seeing it in these data in terms of at what point in a pregnancy should abortions be restricted. But we've seen it in earlier years with views about abortion that regulates clinics, for example, and in other ways makes it harder to get an abortion, but doesn't do away with the right to an abortion. So I think you're seeing that in these three instances as well. Broad, strong support for a right to an abortion, but a lot of difference of opinion about how much you might be allowed to restrict that.
Let's turn to gun rights. There is a case before the Supreme Court currently out of New York that pretty squarely puts the question of whether people have a right to carry a weapon outside their home.
Here, the existing precedent in the U.S. Supreme Court is a ruling now, I think some 15 or more years old, that said that the Second Amendment allowed you to possess a gun inside your home. This case now goes to the question of whether the state or government can make it difficult or impossible to receive a permit to carry a gun outside the home. So potentially this expands the sense of the Second Amendment to some level of a right to possess and carry a gun outside the home. What we see here is 67% favor that extension of the Second Amendment, 33% are opposed, and that's again of those with an opinion, 75% had an opinion on this issue. So I think we're seeing an expansion of public support for carrying guns that if we went back 10 years or so, I think other polling, not ours, but other polling would have shown significantly lower levels of support. But now, by a 2-to-1 margin, people think the Second Amendment should cover that right to carry a gun outside the home.
We also looked at differences in partisanship on this issue and on whether there's a gun in the home of people who were responding.
It certainly won't surprise people that there are big partisan gaps on this gun issue and earlier on the abortion issue for that matter. But here, Republicans are not quite unanimous. 94%, though, support that extension of the Second Amendment. Among independents, 70% support it, but among Democrats, it drops to 36% in favor of that right to carry. So we do see big partisan gaps. On the other hand, it's worth noting that a little more than a third of Democrats would support that interpretation of the Second Amendment.
And by gun ownership in the home?
And gun ownership, again, probably not anybody's surprise. 84% of people that live in a household with a gun favor this expansion. But among non-gun households, it's an even split, 54% in favor, 46% opposed. So even among non-gun households, we're at something right at 50% support for interpreting the Second Amendment to include a right to carry outside the home.
We don't seem to have quite solved the coronavirus problem nationwide yet, and the court has begun to get involved in that, particularly a decision recently that halted the Biden administration effort to require companies with 100 or more employees to require vaccination or frequent testing. What's the opinion on that overall?
Yeah, and here we asked about the policy, not about the court's action. The court actually decided these cases on January 13th, but while we were in the field, while we were doing the survey. But on the requirement for companies to have employees vaccinated, 54% were in favor of that, but 45% were opposed. So a little bit of a majority, but a pretty even split on that issue.
One of the things that we focused on in this set of polls about the Supreme Court is the general attitude towards the job the court is doing. Between September of 2020 and September of 2021, there was a substantial drop in approval of the court's overall performance. What are we seeing now?
Yeah, this is a really pretty striking drop. In September of 2020, we conducted the survey the week before Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, the Supreme Court Justice. At that time, 66% said they approved of the job the court was doing, 33% opposed. In July of 2021, last summer, when we asked that question again, now with Ginsburg gone from the court, Amy Coney Barrett appointed to the court, and a year of decisions, mostly with Barrett on the court, support was still pretty high. Approval was at 60%, disapproval 39%. So not very much movement in that period. But then the court had a set of pretty controversial issues that it dealt with in the late summer. And approval dropped in September of 2021, down from 60 to 49% with 50% disapproving. Since then, it is barely inched up. In this January survey, 52% approve, 46% disapprove. So that's quite a lot of movement over a 2-year period, but even a lot of movement since 6 months ago in July of last year. And it does show that drop in approval is pretty stark, and from pretty high levels of approval, which the court has historically enjoyed, to this even division, which is pretty low for the court historically.
We've also been asking frequently about whether people think the justices decide the cases on the basis of the law or on the basis of politics. And generally, the majorities have been saying that justices decide the cases on the basis of the law, which can be taken as a sign of respect for the work of the court. This time we asked some variations on that question, separating between phrasing it, how do justices decide cases and how does the court as a whole decide cases? Pretty interesting results.
I think so, but be prepared for a little social science geek out here as I explain it. As you said, we have always asked, what do you think the basis of the decisions by justices are, do they make those decisions primarily, mainly based on the law or mainly based on politics? And we've consistently had around 60% or a little higher saying based on law, and therefore about 40% saying based on politics. But other polling phrases the question a little differently. Do you think the Supreme Court decides mainly based on law or mainly based on politics? And you think that little difference between asking about the justices, as we do, and asking about the court as a body, as a single institution, I didn't think that would make very much difference. But those surveys that had asked about the court were getting almost the mirror image of our results, about 60% saying politics and only about 40% saying the law. So I thought this was an interesting puzzle for us to test. So here's how we did it. We randomly split the sample into 4 groups. 2 of those groups were asked either our question about the justices or the other question about the court. And they were asked that at the very beginning of the survey. The only question we asked before that was, how much do you follow politics? The second half of respondents were asked one or the other of those questions late in the survey, after we'd asked about views of the court, after we'd asked about favorability to the justices, and after we had asked about these controversial cases on abortion and gun rights. So that second group of people had been required in the survey to think a lot about the court, more than probably most people do in our daily lives. So here's what we found. When we ask about the justices at the beginning of the survey, 58% say they decide mainly on the law and 42% mainly on politics. That's very close to what we have gotten historically in the survey, in our survey. But when we asked early on about the Supreme Court, 53% said mainly politics and 47% said mainly the law. So that's a pretty big gap, more than 11-point gap between the 2 questions asked early before you've thought about the court, showing that really there is a difference when we ask about justices, plural, but versus when we ask about the Supreme Court. So when people are thinking of the institution, they seem to be seeing it in more political terms, whereas when you kind of humanize it even to a little bit by saying the justices, people are more willing to say it's mainly about the law. But after we've asked a lot of questions, we again randomly asked people one of those 2 questions. And now about the justices, after thinking about the court for a while, 55% say mainly politics, 45% say mainly the law, a reversal of what we found earlier in the survey. And of those asked about the court, it goes up to 60% mainly politics, 40% the law, which is in keeping with the other survey evidence that we have on this question. So I think the takeaway is a seemingly subtle difference in the way people think about the court makes a big difference in how they respond to this question. And it also means when they think about the institution of the court, they're more likely to see it in political terms, and they're especially more likely to do that after they've been made to think a bit about the court and the issues before it. So the takeaway here is, as the court becomes more salient to people, as they think more about it, hear more about it, as issues before it are in the news more, our evidence would be they're more likely to see the court as a political body on those decisions, rather than take away more information about it and think that the court is following the law more. As I told you, it was a social science geek out. So there you go.
It's interesting, though. It's very interesting. As we have found in earlier rounds of the poll, the justices as a whole are not exactly household names. What did we, at least many of them. What do we have this time when it came to opinion on the individual 9 justices?
So exactly, they're not exactly household names. We asked the question, some justices are better known than others. For each of the following, have you never heard of this justice? Heard of, but not enough to have an opinion, or you've heard enough and you have either a favorable or an unfavorable opinion. So we get both the favorability and the awareness of each justice. At the bottom end of visibility, only 21% have an opinion of Justice Stephen Breyer. The highest percentage, 55%, have an opinion of Justice Clarence Thomas. The others are scattered in between. But the Chief Justice, John Roberts, is only 38% have an opinion of him. So it's a sort of striking level of unfamiliarity with individual justices, including those, in this case, these 3 have all been on the court for a lengthy period of time, but you can see the variation in how well known they are.
The 3 most recent justices appointed by President Trump were the ones who had the least favorable overall standing.
Yes, and that sort of stands out. I mean, obviously, we have had controversial, contentious confirmation hearings. Also, the simple greater polarization over Supreme Court appointments has made every appointment one that divides the public more generally, and that was true of these last 3 appointees. They're not, well, they are a bit better known, maybe on average, but Barrett and Kavanaugh better known, Justice Gorsuch considerably less well known. But it is striking that the 3 most recent appointees all have the lowest net favorability ratings. It's a little hard to know whether that's something about their hearings and the things about each of those hearings, or whether it's a recency phenomena, or finally, whether it's a Trump administration phenomena of these 3 all being appointed during the President Trump's administration. We'll follow this in years to come to see how it changes over time.
So overall, what do we learn about the court from this round of polling?
I would add one thing here on the justices, that the level of familiarity with them is, sort of strikingly low. It's far lower than we see for many national political figures. I don't think that's surprising, but it is striking. But when we look at that favorability rating of the justices, all of them except John Roberts line up with voters' own partisanship. They see justices appointed by Republicans more favorably if they're Republican, or more favorably if they're a Democratic appointee if you're a Democrat. So partisanship lines up with views of the justices, even in the face of so much lack of information about the justices. And exactly the same thing happens with political ideology. People's own ideology structures consistently and in the expected way. Conservatives liking conservative justices more, liberals liking liberal justices more. I said John Roberts is the exception to this, and it is striking that even though he's not gigantically well known, he's the one justice perceived in a net favorable way, more favorable than unfavorable, across Republicans, independents, and Democrats. And so I think it's striking that the Chief Justice, who often plays the role of trying to guide the court in its decisions, sometimes more successfully than others, nevertheless has this net positive rating across party. The other thing about Roberts is he's viewed more favorably by the middle categories of ideology, moderates and those only somewhat liberal or somewhat conservative, and his favorability drops off a good bit at the extremes. Very conservative people are just slightly net positive towards him. Very liberal people are just about dead even on him. But it's striking again that the moderate middle of ideology like him better, whereas on all the other 8 justices, there's a steady progression of views from liberal to conservative. So it's maybe not surprising that the public uses its political preferences, your own political positions, to arrive at some judgments of the justices, but it is striking that that happens even though the justices are in fact not terribly well known, and some not well known at all. So what's our big takeaway? This is a term that the court has taken up, contentious issues on abortion and gun rights, and has also dealt with emergency docket measures like the vaccination policies. What we're seeing is that after an initial drop in approval in the late summer, things have been fairly stable about views of the court, but we've also seen that stability during a period in which the big blockbuster cases on abortion and gun rights have not yet come out. And so stay tuned to see how people react to those. And in some cases, the court is likely to act along with public opinion, and in some cases likely to react against public opinion. How does that affect approval of the court in the coming months? Stay tuned. That's why we'll keep doing this survey forever, every 2 months.
Forever's a long time.
Forever's a long time. I might retire before then.
Oh,
but
okay.
For the foreseeable future, we'll keep doing these.
Yes, we plan to be back in a couple months. We will also be releasing currently some results of nationwide polling on non-court issues. All of these results may be found at law.marquette.edu/poll. Thank you, Professor Franklin, for guiding us through these new results. And do stay tuned, as you said, for our effort to keep an eye on opinion and on the pulse of America's legal life through the Supreme Court.